Welcome everybody to the meeting. This is the Development Plans panel and my name is Councillor Caroline Gruen and I'll be chairing the meeting. Today's meeting is being live streamed on the City Council YouTube channel so that the public can observe the meeting without the need to be present. So could I now invite members to introduce themselves, please? I've already done so and we'll move to Martin first.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Martin Elliott and I'm the Head of Strategic Planning.
Catherine Holloway, Team Leader for Sites and Policies.
David Feeney, Chief Planning Officer for Leeds.
Councillor Jim McKenna, an Army Councillor.
Good afternoon, Councillor Peter Carlill, Caverley Farsley Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Al Garthwaite, Headingley and Hyde Park Ward, and I'm substituting at this meeting.
Good afternoon, Councillor Eileen Taylor, and I represent Chapel Allerton Ward.
Good afternoon, Councillor Kaylee Brooks, Little London and Woodhouse Ward.
Heather Davis, Principal Planning Officer.
Councillor Barry Anderson, Avalon Wharfdale Ward. Good afternoon, Toby Russell, Clerk to the panel.
Afternoon, Nicole Walker, Legal Advisor to the panel.
Thank you. And I'm just going to ask Nicole to say a couple of words about PERDA just to keep us all in order.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, as members know, as a result of the election being called for the 4th of May, we're currently in the pre-election period of heightened sensitivity, which we refer to as the PERDA period. Councillor Groom has asked me to just advise members that the purpose of the PERDA period is not to prevent the council from carrying out its normal business, but it is to prevent the business being conducted by the council being used or having the potential to be perceived as being used to secure any electoral advantage. As such, please treat the panel meeting as a normal meeting, but be mindful of debate that amounts to or could reasonably be perceived to amount to electioneering. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone want to ask any questions or pick up any points on that? We had quite a lengthy debate on it, I think, Jim, at one of our previous meetings. No, I think, thank you, Nicole. That's fine. So, Toby, can we go to agenda item 1, please?
Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, I haven't done the minutes, have I?
Oh, sorry. We'll do them afterwards.
Okay.
Under agenda item number 1, there are no appeals against the refusal of inspection of documents. Under item number 2, there are no items which require the exclusion of the press or the public. Under item number 3, there are no late items noted. And under agenda item number 4, can I ask members to declare any interests? Thank you. And under agenda item number 5, apologies have been received from Councillor Hayden with Councillor Garthwaite substituting. And I believe we're still waiting for Councillors Finnegan, Akhtar and Lamb. Thank you.
Can I thank Councillor Garthwaite for substituting on this meeting? Thank you. We've got the minutes, so I'd like to take accuracy and matters arising together, please. And I know that Adam has an issue that he wants to raise from the minutes.
Thank you, Chair. It was more matters arising regarding the Leeds Local Plan 2040 consultation that members will be aware of. We closed that consultation on the 24th of March, and just to update members, we've had a good turnout in terms of responses received. So we've had roughly 1,000 responses to that consultation, with a split of about circa 750 smart surveys, which are our electronic questionnaire, and about 250 emails. We've so far had about 450 site submissions as part of the Call for Sites exercise. Members will recall, though, that that's not closing at the same time. That's an ongoing process for the time being, which will close, but later on during the process. So we feel it's been a positive process. There's still some engagement exercises ongoing. As we've explained throughout, I think that we feel this is the beginning of the process in terms of engagement. So there's many more opportunities for consultation throughout the spring and the summer.
Thank you, Adam. Are there any points or questions anybody would like to add or query? Lovely. Thank you for the catch up. That's great. Can I welcome Councillor Lamb? I believe this is the first DPP you've attended since you were poorly, so welcome back. It's nice to have you there. So we are now on the main substantive item, please. Under item number 7. Are you? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. So I bring today a report and a draft technical guidance note on the issue of co-living. This has been drawn together with assistance from colleagues in plans and policy and development management. It's also been pulled together using previous notes and best practice from other cities. You may recall that we've had previous briefings on this subject over the last 2 years. And for those that sit on plans panel, you may have already seen some co-living proposals coming through the planning system. So in summary, co-living, it's still a relatively new concept of housing or model of housing. It largely appeals to younger professionals looking for more communal living. It's characterised by relatively small individual private units supported by communal facilities, such as shared kitchens, shared lounges. So the model shares some similarities to modern student accommodation, but it is distinct in planning terms and attracts different end users. Neither the MPPF nor the Leeds local plan contain policies which specifically refer to co-living. And whilst we drafted a PBSA, purpose-built student accommodation and HMO, houses in multiple occupation, and a co-living SPD as was a couple of years ago, that was originally intended to include new guidance. And it was decided at that time in a development plan panel back in December 2020, that following legal advice, because there wasn't a policy hook, that we remove that co-element living from that SPD. So, as I say, there's no dedicated use class within the use class orders for co-living. As such, it's likely to sort of fit between sui generis, i.e. a use without a use class, or in some cases it can fall within a C3 dwelling houses, a sort of typical residential use. We've seen it within Leeds that it's important to ensure that planning policies which secure quality in housing design, affordability, amenity, sustainability, health and well-being, and community infrastructure apply equally to co-living as well, because we ultimately see that co-living is a form of permanent accommodation. So we've been working as officers internally to an internal guidance note, which hasn't been published. Previously, it was agreed that officers required more time to monitor schemes coming through, to evaluate and better understand how the model was coming forward and being operated. However, it's recognised that there is currently the potential for an inconsistent approach to co-living applications without that formal visible guidance on the issue. So in the short term, deciding that we'd sort of formally publish a position on co-living, it hopefully will help to ensure that there's a consistent decisions being made, that officers, applicants and members will be able to work from the same guidance. And in addition, the note also offers the opportunity to clarify the council's broad approach to co-living. In the longer term, we recognise that the current policy vacuum is best addressed through new planning policy adopted for the Leeds Local Plan 2040, which specifically can address or at least recognise co-living. So the brief covers material considerations around location, affordable housing, as well as the size of units and the size of community facilities and the access, and particularly the focus on that qualitative access to communal facilities. We also highlight the importance of the opportunity of post-occupancy surveys in the monitoring, which will be really helpful to inform those longer term policies through the Leeds Local Plan 2040. As the draft document is now in the public domain, we've also had some initial developer feedback, some of which may be useful to relay to panel today. The first one I think is a really positive one, is that the document provides a balanced note, so that's welcome. It does raise question as to whatever happened to the draft SPD on the PBSA and HMSO space standards. It is noted that that has drifted and that's due to resourcing, but our intention is still to progress that PBSA and HMSO SPD on space standards. It's not an easy title, I have to say. There's also some concern raised on the space standards referenced and the aggregate approach between private and communal space. We specifically don't give a calculation within the document. We do say that each scheme has to be assessed on its own merits, and we're using the space standards of the NDSS, which is about 37 square metres to aggregate out where the private space in co-living, it certainly is not going to meet that. So it's looking at the aggregate of what is being provided elsewhere within the schemes to look at that. But we don't provide a specific calculation because there are different models, there are different layouts that are coming forward. So to do so at this stage, I think would to make it too onerous. They have said that it, as a crude proxy, would perhaps need a stronger qualification that will be looking at other aspects of sort of qualitative communal provision within schemes. Developers have also raised the link on page, I can't remember what page it was, a different page in your documents, but page 10 of the appendix, where we reference link to policy H10 and the accessibility criteria set within that. They have highlighted that that is a specific compliance to a C3 use, and as I've said, co-living can sort of trip over into that sui generis. So I think we just need to just clarify the wording and the links around that. However, really strongly, we should sort of be encouraging access and equality to all for all development schemes. And I don't see why co-living schemes should be treated any differently and shouldn't have provision for accessible access. Finally, just onto the recommendations, really, to note and comment on the contents of the draft technical planning guidance, and that subject to those comments received, David, Chief Planning Officer, sat next to me, will approve the technical guidance note, and will then use it in the determination of planning applications from the point of publication. I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. Sorry, thank you very much, Catherine. As this is a development plans panel and not a formal decision-making panel, as in applications, we can take questions and comments together. So if anybody would like to comment. So first of all, I've got Colin, not unusually, and then I've got Councillor Anderson.
Yes. Initially, can I apologise, Chair, for arriving slightly late. Somebody's closed Arlington Lane and not told me about it. Not Arlington Lane, Leafley Lane, not told me about it. So I had a nice tour to get here. It's North Yorkshire, you're all right. It's not your fault.
I went for many things, but not that.
It's not your fault. Number one is, as Catherine said, we're in uncharted territory here, aren't we? This is new. So what we do, I suppose, we shouldn't take a precedent from elsewhere. And I know it's often mentioned that this is effectively students Mark II. Actually, I don't think we should think of it like that. And I think we need to establish a principle, and then perhaps we could talk about the detail. It's the principle of what are we trying to do. Initially, I've said, in effect, these are just very big HMOs. And I think if you'd come to us and you wanted to convert a house into an HMO like this, we'd be saying no. So it seems to me that we have to look at what are we trying to do with these, because it seems to me that developers are looking at this as a method of, in effect, creating extra value by not producing units of a size that we've fought for a long time to obtain. And I know they talk about this communal space, but I think if you're talking about adults, and we can't limit the age of those adults. You know, you're saying mostly it's related to, I suppose, the younger end, but actually we can't condition that. You can't say nobody over 25 can live here. So it should be all age ranges. And I just have this concern over effectively creating these very large HMOs, which, though they may start off well managed, we've no guarantee that that management will continue, or even that the model will continue. And I also would flag up at this point, because I was thinking about it as I came in. We all know, don't we, when we sit on city plans in particular, the way developers come to us and say, we can't afford to do X, Y, and Z because of, in effect, the viability. And I'm just wondering if we ought to ask the district valuer how they would assess viability on one of these units. Because I think we all have worries, don't we, that the current method for build to rent viability is skewed in favour of the developer, in that if effectively it undervalues the property because there's no final sale cost. So it would seem to me that I would be interested to know when we get one of these that comes along with that sort of claim, it's not viable to do what you want us to do, whatever conditions we set down, where we are. But I do think that I really would like us to get a very clear steer or create a very clear statement of principle in relation to this type of accommodation, because I have real concerns about what, as I've said, is in effect a glorified giant HMO. I can talk about the detail in later, but.
Thanks very much, Councillor Campbell. And I don't want you to misinterpret this remark as my support for this type of co-living. But I would observe that there are some differences between an HMO as we know it and this kind of development, in that this is purpose built and it's not on a street of family houses and it's not built specifically for very young adults. There are differences. But nevertheless, I think a lot of the points that you make do need our careful consideration. We are due for Dale Robinson to arrive, who is the author of the council's viability study on this. So I'm just wondering if he, when he does arrive, might be better to address this. Are we definitely expecting him, Martin?
It's for a different item. That is for the workshop.
Okay.
Chair,
Oh, right.
so
So he's not going to come to this half.
No.
Okay.
No.
So would anybody like to just address the viability question that's been raised currently?
Just to come back first, I think I understand the points that Councillor Campbell's making, and in a sense that's the reason for the technical guidance. So the reason that we have this link to our existing policy suite, which seeks to provide quality accommodation within Leeds, is because we have in front of us a different model. And you'll know that we're not building enough houses quickly enough. That's one of the MPPF's most recent announcements was around the need to boost the supply of housing delivery. So we have a developer and we have a model entering the market which seeks to build at scale on a particular type of scheme. Now that will add variety to the amount of options available to people to take accommodation within Leeds, because we already have build to rent going on within the city centre. We already have purpose-built student accommodation, which is necessarily limited, and in some circumstances on the fringe of the city centre we have some owner-occupied housing. What this will do is this will diversify the type of housing offer to Leeds, and in a sense, as a local planning authority, our obligation is to determine what's in front of us and what's submitted to us. And this guidance assists us in doing that within the context of the way in which we would like new homes to come into the city. So I think the question around, is this model on its own terms viable, and what are the development viability reasons for providing this model? aren't really considerations that we should engage ourselves with, provided that this model provides a decent home and it meets the policies that we've set out for what a quality accommodation in Leeds looks like.
Well, I won't hog it, but simply to say this provides diversity. Mobile homes provide a diversity. I'm simply saying I'm not sure this actually is the diversity we might want, or I might want. Not sure about everybody else.
I'm sure we'll come back to that, Councillor Campbell, but we'll take Councillor Anderson first.
General comments. In respect of paragraph 2.4, where you talk about there's no use class, what's the view of your professional body on this? Because you referenced London. Well, anybody knows, I mean, everything is always London centric in this country, even the professional bodies are. So what have the professional bodies been saying about this? Because the London authorities probably would have been shaping policy. Have they come up with anything that they're planning to do? And as such, what conversations have they had with the inspector as to how they may be wanting to interpret things? And have there been any refusals or any applications gone to an inspector nationally on this? And what, if anything, can we draw from that, positively or negatively? You know, is there anything that we could, so that we can make an informed decision? In terms of paragraph 3.6, when do you anticipate getting that information gathering exercise? Because if you found out the types of individual who might be interested in that type of, they might be able to guide as to what they would like to see in it as a minimum. Now, there'll always be people who will want more, but if you can come up with a minimum, then these are effectively the minimum standards that we've consulted on. We've got evidence to back it up. So if we do turn someone down because they've got too small a space, we can say, well, we've got the consultation that confirms that this is what is anticipated. And then the other one, which was on the affordable housing. If I remember correctly, the government were trying to incentivize and try and help out people like nurses and various other things to get cheaper accommodation. Is there anything we can say? Because you do reference that nurses, the NHS might be the potential for this, but when it comes to affordable, is there 800 to £1,200 is a heck of a lot of money, you know? So is there anything we can do to build on what incentives the government are putting in place to try and get accommodation for what's seen as important workers, key workers, or whatever phrase? Is there anything we can use in there to give you help and support to make sure that a number of the places in these buildings are for people whose incomes aren't anywhere near affording that level when you multiply them up as to what incomes they've got? And then the final thing is, should we be putting something in about climate change so that when they're building these buildings, they are putting in energy sources that are renewable, sustainable as a bare minimum? So in other words, if you want to come to us for this, we will welcome, well, albeit reluctantly, but we will welcome them. But if you're showing willing and coming forward with as close to zero as you possibly can, we will look at that as a way of mitigating any other things that you feel you can't do. For example, the disability one, although I would agree with you that we should stick to it. But at least if they're not complying with that part, they need to then be going further on another part, in my view, to compensate for that. And that would help us as a city meet our objectives. Just some thoughts, some random thoughts.
A few issues to go on there, Catherine. I'll let you wade through the
I think there was 5 there. That's fine. I'll start at the beginning. So yeah, others have defined it. London are ahead of the game on this, but they have put it in their policy, and I think that's the difference between London and Leeds. Others are grappling with the same sort of vacuum in terms of the use class definition and how it falls between sui generis and residential. So it is really down to, I think, individual local planning authorities and how they define it and where they put it within policy in that definition. Liverpool have recently grappled with that similar vacuum, and they've produced a similar planning policy advice note, of which we've sort of stolen little bits from, but taken that sort of guidance. They've also recently successfully defended an appeal for a co-living scheme, and that was based the grounds were on it failing to meet the local plan policies on housing mix. Now, co-living schemes are generally 100% one bed because of the model in the format that they come. They come in as a one bed private space with communal facilities. I have to say that we've stayed pretty silent on mix because of that model, and we'd have to sort of again look at whether the model of co-living schemes bring forward different sized units, and then I think it becomes something else. The Liverpool scheme was also contrary to the internal space standards, and Liverpool uses the same NDS space standards that Leeds does. The appeal case in Liverpool was given, well, we're not sure how much the guidance note was given sort of material weight to the determination, but it certainly did sort of help. But it really was that the case that looking at the sort of the communal space, the private space, it wasn't enough, it wasn't sufficient, and that's why that appeal was dismissed. You referenced paragraph 3.6, which for those that haven't got the document in front of them, refers to the strategic housing market assessment, which was updated in 2017, and we're just currently in the process of updating that. It's likely that we won't have a response until August this year, and that will input and influence our draft policies on. So it will certainly be a key part of that evidence base that you reference. And as I say, you know, we recognise that there is a void and a vacuum in our own policies and our own local plan. And that's something that the local plan update 2040 can look at, and the SHMAR evidence can feed into that. Fourth point on affordable housing, really do sort of recognise, and we do recognise that this could be a form of accommodation that could apply to key workers. Again, similar to sort of the age concerns, we can't condition who it could be applied to. Similarly, in terms of affordable housing, we sort of said each case by its case. It's most likely that we take a commuted sum, but who could go and occupy that? That's something that we'd need to look at, and that's something that the post-occupancy surveys might give us more evidence on. And your last point on climate change policies, this technical guidance note is very much specifically to provide that sort of evidence on the qualitative sort of role between co-living and housing. It doesn't pick up on all policies of the local plan. It does specifically state that other policies will apply to cases, and so all our emerging climate change policies through emerging, well, the ones that we currently have and ones that are emerging through local plan update 1 would apply to schemes as they come through. So all of the environmental considerations will be applicable. Okay.
Would you like to
It was just to reiterate a point that Catherine made in terms of the Liverpool decision and the question that Councillor Anderson asked about sui generis definitions. Sorry, that's squeaking a bit. And yes, so to reiterate that in that appeal decision, Liverpool's position was that it was sui generis. The inspector doesn't necessarily disagree or agree. The inspector says, if you're familiar with inspectors' reports, that probably won't surprise you, but I'll quote, the application form describes the use as being sui generis. Both parties agree that this is appropriate to classify the use in this way, and I have no reason to take a different view. So the inspectorate, I think at large, would probably be hopefully applying that consistently. So we can take some confidence that it is a sui generis use.
Thank you. Councillor Brooks.
Thank you, Chair. I have to agree entirely with Councillor Campbell, surprising no one, because
especially with regards to the minimum space standards. I don't think it's enough to say that 37 metres square should be spread around. I'd feel a lot more comfortable if it was 37 metres, and that is the minimum space for a flat, and then you can just add more shared like rooms and things like gyms and things like that on top of that. I'd also like to point out that co-living as a concept is not a new concept, which I said, I think last time that this was raised. It's been around in Leeds for decades, entirely organically, with people coming together to do it themselves and choosing to live that way. And it works very well for those people, and it works very well for people who choose to live together. I'd be really concerned about conflict between residents and how would that be resolved. I'd be concerned about Unipol often have to step in to sort out disagreements between shared housing tenants and things like that. So there isn't a Unipol for this kind of accommodation. So I'd really be concerned about people's mental health with that and the impact on people's well-being. Also, the proposed rent per month is absolutely obscene, 800 to 1200. I'm really not into that at all. I do feel if that is going to be the kind of sum that we're looking at, then it should really be possible for the 37 metre square plus the shared rooms, shared use rooms, dining rooms, kitchens and things like that. I can't see how that wouldn't be viable. I won't say the thing about dystopian. Got a big rant lined up, but I don't think it's appropriate. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. As you've raised some of the issues that were in my mind, I'll just share and agree with most of what you've said. I'm really concerned about the size of the studios. I think looking at the diagrams or the illustrations, it's a very small private space. And then you are living all of the rest of the time with other people. And in terms of student accommodation or students sharing a house, you tend to get groups of friends together saying, let's go to a house and share a house together. Let's create a project for us to live. In the case of projects like Lilac, Councillor McKenna, I hope I'm not stealing your thunder, a group of people came together who wanted that style of living, who then created it, and who now interview people before they're allowed to buy a property there or move into that development, because it is so important that they want to live that life and that they are prepared to do what it takes to sustain that way of life. And if you're in a tiny little space like these studios, and you're with other people that you might not know for the whole of the rest of the time, that does raise alarm bells with me in terms of neighbourly relations and how that might pan out. So this is a different sort of development, and it could have people moving into it at any time, at any stage in their development of their career, working life, or otherwise. It could even have a mix of students in, actually, if they've got rich parents. I just think we have to think about the lifestyle we're building for. That would be my view on the things that you've said. And I agree with what you've said about affordability too. I think we need some, and I think that Councillor Anderson's idea, I think it was, of having some reserved for key workers is a really good idea. And if there's any way we could bring that about, I think it would be beneficial, without a doubt. Yeah. Would any officer like to comment on Councillor Brooks's comments?
Just on the management point, Chair, I think Councillor Brooks had raised that at a city plans panel. I think at the time the developer promoting the co-living scheme was talking about sort of the management responsibilities inside of the building and trying to put a regime in place that sort of safeguarded people. I think we recognised at the time through that debate that it was a key issue, and clearly in terms of schemes coming forward, they're key questions to ask, aren't they, in terms of the internal management arrangements and the responsibilities and the safeguarding to make sure that, you know, residents are living in a secure environment. So I think it's a very valid point to make, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McKenna.
Thank you, Chair. I have to say the conversation I mostly agree with. I assume that if there is any need for cars, that there'll be electrical EV charging, and all our climate policies, ENs, will be part of the package. Incidentally, about lilac that you mentioned, I have had 1 or 2 complaints. They do interview people for tenancy, and it's very, very socialistic. They work out the rent at 10% of your earnings, which is great, the last I heard. Wouldn't we all love that? But they do have a policy regarding age. And people in the 60s have been turned down because they're seeking to have more families. Seeing as this is an issue today about age, you know, I mean, they do their own thing, they self-manage it. They're great people. I live in the same street as them, and you know, we've worked on lots of environmental projects together, but they do have an age criteria. What I'm a little bit worried about, as I say, your comments and others are something that we should be concerned about and needs a resolution. But I wonder, these flats, putting aside the smallest of the spaces, they're designed for 1 person living. What's to stop 2 people sharing, a couple? Is there anything that says it has to be for 1? It would make so much more economic sense if a couple or a couple of nurses or whatever shared it, you know. And I do think key workers should be a really good consideration that Barry has made. But there are a few little issues I think that we do need to hold out. And if it should come to committee, and I know this is jumping ahead, I think given what we've done in the past, that we've always taken this as City Plans Panel until these issues are resolved, because it'll be examined very carefully there and very, very forensically. And I'll leave it at that, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Would officers like to come in on that, or are you happy to note? Martin.
Coming on a general point, Chair, I think I do understand where members are coming from in terms of this new type of development, and I think part of the issue is it's difficult to understand what it is. It's not necessarily a lived experience or a lived residential experience that people around this table would be looking for. But what it is doing is it's providing an option on that ladder, on that housing ladder, for recent graduates, for young professionals who don't otherwise have that opportunity or don't want to move into build to rent accommodation. And some of what we're hearing from the sector is that there is a desire to maintain that shared living, that social living, and that connection with other people, other like-minded people of similar age, within the residential offer, which I think this is trying to meet. But just to comfort members, that there's several things that I think we'll commit to try to get that evidence about what this lived experience is going to be like in Leeds within co-living, should they be approved within the city. The first is the SHMA and specific questions in the housing survey to see if there's a known demand within the city for this type of development. The second is the post-occupancy survey, which is not something we tend to do, but something that I think we're going to commit to do to really explore what the lived experience of people living in completed schemes is. And I think the next point I wanted to make is that I understand the points you're making around key workers, but this is technical guidance to guide existing policy that we've got within the plan. So it's not setting new policy. It has to clarify to the industry and ensure consistency, that we're applying the policies we already have in a consistent way. So we don't have a policy seeking key worker accommodation for housing. We have a policy on affordable housing. And this guidance is setting out how that policy on affordable housing will be implemented. Now, key worker housing policy for co-living might be something that you wish to explore through Leeds Local Plan 2040. And we can certainly discuss that at the time. But I think for now, this guidance has to really respond to what we already have within the development plan. Thank you.
Thank you very much for clarifying that, Martin. Councillor Carlill.
Thank you, Chair. Few points on it, really. I mean, I've got some concerns based on quite a lot of what's happened in the discussion as well. I mean, one of my major concerns is if we see lots of these types of schemes developed, I have real concerns it may push up the price of what I will call space standard schemes for separate apartments, and probably end up pricing some people out of those in favour of other areas. And I think that's not something we'd want. I'd want to see here, if something came through for this, something that definitely quantified a reason why it was like this scheme and why that communal space was there and what it'd be used for. Because the option is you live in a space standards defined apartment of your own somewhere in the city centre and can then access a gym or restaurant wherever you wish to the rest of the time in the city centre. If it's going to be in one building, I think it really does need to be, there needs to be a reason for it, so this doesn't become a standard that effectively makes a race to the bottom in some of this. I guess the other concern I have is around the scale, because we talked about shared housing. Yeah, 6 people living together in a big house in Hyde Park is experience I've had that I'm sure many have, but that is a certain number of people. If you want to use the kitchen in that area, if you want to have a quiet read in the living room, you can guarantee there's not going to be a queue too long to do so. If you've got apartments like this with, 50 apartments, that might be a particular scale. If there's suddenly hundreds, 500 of these, let's say, in a real big purpose-built development, that's a lot of people looking to use a communal space, and possibly a lot longer to wait for it, depending what it is. And I think I would, you can't really, regardless of the communal space, you can't do what you want to in that communal space if there's already lots of other people taking it up at the time. And that's the real concern I have with it, how that fits. So if you fancy a quiet read in somewhere that isn't your small private apartment, what do you do if there's 15 other people in that communal area making lots of noise? And I think that's a real concern I have. And so I think something needs to be there around the scale or maybe the size of the buildings that would be allowed in this. So suddenly you haven't got 500 people clamoring all to make dinner at one time in a particular area. The other side is that point that we've touched around the period of living. Student apartments, yes, you could study something incredibly complex that might take you many years, but in a way there's a maximum prescribed limit you will stay in a purpose-built student scheme. And for most people, that would be a maximum of 3 years if they're doing a standard undergraduate. Many people obviously move on to different types of accommodation in that, whereas these would be for somebody to live for however long. There's no limit, obviously, and we couldn't put a limit on that. But I'm very concerned, really, if somebody finds themselves in one because they have been forced to on a price issue, and then are there for 20 years in something that may not be suitable. I'm not sure. I completely take your point around choice, but I think choice is an illusion if cost is where your choice is, and that's my real concern over these. But I think something around, regardless of that, I think something around scale does need to be looked into there. How many communal areas you may have per the number of separate apartments would be of interest to me, and whether they were restricted to say that 20 people, 30 people, or whatever it may be, so you can guarantee it's not too many.
I recall us going to see some student accommodation in the centre of town, but I can't remember the exact location. And they did have, it was organised in sections. So there were, I think, 2 living rooms or 3, I can't remember, but there were several versions of each shared space, which presumably were designed to tackle some of the issues you're describing. But I'll ask officers to come in.
So I think that's absolutely right. So the purpose, Councillor Carlisle, of having the aggregated approach to this, the personal and the shared, is that there'll be almost like a pro rata. So as a development gets bigger, you'll find more shared spaces, and the intent with the technical guidance is to make sure that the amenity and the security and the access to that space is on each floor at least. So there'll be a kitchen on each floor, there'll be a lounge on each floor, etc. You're not having to go up and down stairs in order to access these things. But you'll find the more people that are around you, the bigger you'll find the facilities and the more of them you'll find, because of the need to aggregate that to personal space standards.
I think that's good, and I take that point. I just what you said there that was the important was more shared spaces, and I'm not sure there's anything in this document that gave me confidence that the more people you had, the more shared spaces you would have, rather than just the same number of very large spaces, which isn't necessarily the same thing. And I think it's something we, on an application, I'd be looking at it very carefully. I'm just not sure what grounds we'd have to justify that in any way.
We can take that back and give that some further thought. Yeah.
I also think the point, sorry, I'll bring you back in a moment, Jim. I also think the point that you made about this not necessarily being a living experience that people around this table would be seeking, and therefore perhaps that's reflected in some of the comments, maybe. But I do think the issue of feedback from those who are currently living this experience is absolutely key. We need to know what they feel about living in something like this and what things they would like to be different as a result of their experience. And I honestly would be reluctant to do any development until we've got that sort of first-hand view of the lived experience. I just think it's so important, because there will be errors and oversights in the way these are organised, and we might as well know about those from the beginning. So I don't know how practical that is to organise, or where you might gain such a view from first-hand.
We can certainly gather that intelligence, because there are co-living schemes across the country, and the proposers of those schemes, I'm sure will be keen to inform us of their residents' views. But I think the other aspect of this, I think it would be really helpful for members to visit a scheme and actually walk around a scheme,
Yes,
and understand what it's like. So we'll look into that as well.
thank you. I do have Councillor Garthwaite down, and then I'll come to Jim.
Thank you. Yes, I've lived in a number of different situations, and including student halls of residence, completely communal living with us all sharing together, not a student shared house, but a deliberate one when we were older, and had a lot of politics around it. And also I've then rented out space in my own house for actors or mature students who are here for a brief amount of time, people who are relocating and want to live here, some of the sorts of people that are listed here. And so I do know a bit about what makes it work. And of course, that was with sharing the kitchen and bathroom with me. So they had a room. And what I tended to find and saw was that the older people were, the more space of their own they needed. And of course, once people made friends, they wanted to have their own space to bring them to, which wasn't just a bedroom. So I can see the need for this. I'm concerned, as many have said, about the cost. It wouldn't suit all of the people that I've just listed. It would be too much, but I think it could be still a valuable short-term thing, but slightly different, I imagine, from an apart hotel, which we also see. But looking into more into the detail, it says an on-site concierge or management services, and management services which might be available 24 hours. But as just about everybody knows, where there's a phone number that says 24 hours, it is not always answered 24/7 at all. You leave a message. And in the middle of a difficulty, I think that is really unsuitable for the sort of thing that is being talked about. On the other hand, having somebody on site who can take responsibility for security or whatever might happen will obviously put the price up, and I totally understand that. And then people, you have to weigh those things. Going on to purpose built, I'm wondering whether this means actually totally new build, where carbon considerations could obviously be taken into account and it could be made environmentally good, or whether it just means a shell of a larger building, which we have a number in my ward, for example, which have been turned into student flats.
Councillor Campbell, can you put your mic on if you're making a contribution, please?
Sorry, just diving in. The direct line building down by Dortmund Square. We went to look round, didn't we, for one of these? So that's an existing building. It's not a new build.
Yes, well, I would think that to take on an existing building would make it harder to meet all the sort of environment standards that we would like to see. And therefore, I think some really firm standards on that have to be set to start with and made as conditions. Otherwise, it'll just be some sort of rabbit warren of in an old building, which could be not properly soundproofed, let alone other carbon issues there. And I just wondered whether a window is required, because looking at the plans, I couldn't see a space for a window, and the thought of spending time in a windowless little container is really unattractive and bad, very bad for mental health. If you're somebody who doesn't actually want to go and mix communally very much, and you're setting about your work in the evening when you're there or something, I think that could be really harmful. And I do think everyone needs to have a source of natural light.
Thank you. I think that last point was really, really important, and I haven't actually clocked there were no windows. So let's hear what the officer response is.
Thank you. This was meant to be a cross section. So you've got an internal wall with a door accessing from a corridor, and then the external wall with a window. I admit it's not very clear. It's just showing the sort of different space configurations within private area. One of the things that's been picked up as a comment externally, internally, I should say, is that we should also give examples of that sort of communal space as well, by providing a diagram illustrating sort of private space configurations. It almost gives that emphasis on that private space rather than the relationship to really what we're putting in the text in that qualitative interaction with the space. So yeah, I can take away that illustration and relook at that for clarification, definitely.
And now that I've seen, I think 2 of them have windows, do they? Not 3. Now that I've seen what is the window in those illustrations, it could be bigger. No reason at all why it couldn't be bigger. And I think it probably should be. Councillor McKenna again.
Oh, it was a very brief one, Chair, and you started to cover it, and Martin did address it. Last time we had her, we felt that a visit was very, very important. That's what we did when we looked at student accommodation first. We couldn't, we had the same worries. So we arranged some visits, and when we'd seen it and we'd seen the social area, the gym and the cooking areas, we were satisfied and come up with a policy. At the time, I believe we were offered to visit one in London, but I think we got a bit concerned about the cost. I believe that was the only one available at the time, but I did see Martin say that there are places around the country, not necessarily London. And I think we were just worried about the expenses. And I think, and I hope I'm allowed to say it, but I don't think they had offered to pay for us. And I think it was rightly turned down because of the political implications. So it seems to me the very next stage in this now, Chair, is a visit, quite frankly. And I think that really should be arranged.
Yes, I agree. A visit and also some feedback from people who've been living there for a period of time, long enough to have a view about it, is my preferred option. I don't know which order you put your hands up in, but I'm taking Councillor Lamb because it's his first time he's contributing.
Thank you, Chair. It's been an interesting conversation. I can see both sides of it, and I think this is one of those things we really have to take care to get it to get it right, because a lot of the concerns that colleagues have raised are extremely valid, and you could end up building significant new ghettos in the city if you're not careful, and this isn't guided right. Conscious as well, we don't have huge amounts of time to play with, so we need to be fleet of foot to get this guidance down. Otherwise, we're stuck with nothing to assess applications against, and that could lead to even worse outcomes, because we might find ourselves forced on plans panels to give permission to things simply because of the lack of a guidance note. So I think we've got to get something in quickly and practically, but we also need the flexibility to review it quickly, so we don't suddenly find that we've got dozens and dozens of schemes with permission, only to find the first one gets occupied and we think we've made some terrible mistakes, but we've already approved another 6 or 7. So I think we've just got to steer a really steady path. I wouldn't want to sit here and say it's because it's not what I would want to live in. That doesn't mean there are lots of other people who might. I'd really like to see the evidence base and the sort of housing needs assessment that identifies how many people are looking to live in this kind of situation, and where specifically, because it kind of sounds like it's geared up to city centre, but does that preclude somebody from coming to an outer area and saying, well, there's nothing in there that says, we might think it's not appropriate for other locations, but have we said that in the guidance? And that's something to think about as well. It's not just about, because we see it with HMOs. There are some places where I can think of my own ward where there are HMOs that are just people with completely different value sets living side by side, and you just built a conflict straight away. It's not that one is right and one is wrong, but putting them next to each other is a recipe for disaster. And we need to think about that sort of thing. So I'd certainly support a visit and a bit more understanding of people's lived experience. But I think we just have to be really careful with this.
Yeah, I would agree. And I would add to those comments that we need to be, and this probably isn't in the technical guidance, I accept, but we do need to be careful about the speed and the quantity at which we develop. We really do need to build a few and test and see, rather than flood the city with them and then find that they're not working as we thought they would. So I think that's important too. I've got Councillor Campbell and then Councillor Brooks.
Right. Can I make a couple of general points and then talk specifically to the applying local plans? I think you keep saying to us young professionals, and they're hoping to continue their student life, but the difference between young professionals and maybe old professionals too is that they don't go home at the weekend or for the school or the holidays or take the washing home and things like that. So it's a different, and I said that at the very beginning, it's a different type of accommodation we're providing, and we should not be saying this is follow-on student accommodation, because it isn't. And I know we talked about feedback about the feedback, I suppose, and the comment that I might not want to live there. Well, I think there are 2 reasons. One is your feedback might be coloured by the fact that you don't know anything else, because if you've left home, gone to a purpose-built student block, you know what it was like at home, you know what it was like in the student block, but you don't know any other experience, which is probably a good reason for a shared house with friends, actually, because you learn a lot. And you could say to me, would I want to live there? And the answer is no, I wouldn't. And that's because I can afford better. And I think that's the key. I can afford better. And that's what worries me, is that if, for example, I couldn't afford better, I would end up there. Does that sound bad? End up there? That's not quite what I didn't quite come out and it was meant to, was that one. I need to ask the question about 2 bedrooms, because if you've got a 2-bedroom, you could have children there. So how do you protect the children from everybody else on the block? All right, that really worries me. And I think if I go to page 7 on the the appendix, and we look at 4.1. Can I ask, would we be saying that each of these units contributes to our housing numbers? So each of these flats would be technically, well, you're shaking your head, nodding your head, that's right, fine, that's good. I'm like Alan here, I think it should apply everywhere. I'm not happy about some of the policies we just have for the city centre. We should apply the same criteria across the city, I think. And on 4.6, you talk about assessing whether there's sufficient communal space, ovens, fridges, kitchens, etc. How are you going to define that? And can you define that actually? How many ovens should there be per flat? How many washing machines should there be per flat? Etc. Like everybody, these are really pokey little studios. They are not big enough, full stop. You know my view on the size of units, and I've banged on about it for years now. Why, with this model, do we stick people in substandard accommodation? These are too small. Let's not muck about. Let's just say that directly now. We cannot accept them this small. I think if you're an adult, you need a separate bathroom. And I think you need a separate bedroom, not a bed sit cum kitchenette, which is what these are. Space standards, I'm with you. I think 37 square meters is small. And that's the minimum space I think we should be accepting. Affordables, I think they should contribute to the affordable in the same way that every other block does. And I know in the city centre there's a penchant for buying them out, but effectively we should be asking for that affordable contribution. And the comment around on 410 about the price point of 800 to 1200, that's a month. I think it was 2 cycles ago at City Plans, we asked about the price of a wood bedroom flat in a development. We were told that was £1,000. So what we're doing is setting the minimum price now of 1,200, which is going to push up the price of a single bedroom flat to a figure bit above 1,200. That is just, I believe that's just an impossible price. You know, my other favourite topic, green space. You know, I was coming to that one. If you're building these blocks with 200, 300, 400 people in, they need somewhere to sit outside. Look out the window. We've got a small space there being used by these people. Okay, they're having the wedding photo and it's very nice. It's good for them. But actually, you need some space to sit out. And I cannot accept. And if this is a new model, I think we can start insisting that we have it on site. You can't buy out of this one. I think that if you go on to 418, where it says travel planning in excess of 50, I think that's too low. I think we should have, I think 25 would be better, in my opinion. And so I'd like us to just change that. If you just bear with me while I just look at my notes. The management is something we've all raised, isn't it? And I have concerns about you selling on the block or the flat. And as you know, we've got this 22-year rule for affordability, for viability. The assumption that after 22 years, effectively, the flats, the block ceases to exist. Well, I think we need some certainty about what happens at the end of the period. Will they always be a managed unit, or is there capacity effectively to sell off a floor or something like that? I agree with, I can't remember who said it, but about the 24-hour on site. I think we should insist on that. That's not a question. That's not a maybe. That's, it has to be. There has to be 24-hour supervision. And I think I've got another note there. It says, about permitted development rights. I think we should take them off. Not we may take them off, but we will take them off. Okay.
Is that your list of points complete? I'm sure due notes have been made. Thank you. I've got Councillor Brooks next, and then I'll come to Councillor Lamb.
Thanks, Chair. I'm not really going to go into the detail of it because I'm just straight up not happy with like or any of it really. I don't think any of it is acceptable. I would like to again echo Councillor Campbell's everything that he said. Going to compare HMOs and PBSA and this model of supposed co-living. The thing is with the HMO is that they're not managed really. You can have 50, 100, 150 properties managed by one property company. PBSA in theory is managed. There are fewer issues with PBSA, but that's partly to do with location more than management, I feel. Just to address what you were saying, Councillor Lamb, about not wanting HMOs in your ward. So yeah, that's partly a management issue with HMOs. And I think as well, in terms of your HMO prices, for one room at the moment, it's about £400 a month. Which again is absurd because it's one room. Absolutely absurd. I have changed my mind about not saying anything about how dystopian it all is, because it is entirely dystopian that this is in front of us. I think I'd like also to say something about the use for key workers. I feel like key workers likely wouldn't be able to afford this kind of accommodation, even if they wanted to live in it. So I'm not sure that it'll address the need for housing for key workers at all. And also, I'm not sure that the majority of graduates would be able to afford to live here either, because I don't know about anyone else, but when I was a graduate, I had no pennies to rub together at all. So if you're on a starting salary of not very much, you're not going to be able to cover that. I really don't think that this is something that we should be encouraging in the city. We are not London, we are Leeds, and we need to uphold our space standards that, as Councillor Campbell has said, have been so hardly fought for. And I will shut up and go for a wee.
Too much information, Councillor Brooks. Thank you very much for those comments. I have noted Martin writing all these things down. I'm going to take Councillor Lamb, and then I think we'll probably have to come to a conclusion. So I'll ask you to just summarise the main points you've made a note of. Councillor Lamb.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be relatively brief. I just want to clarify, I didn't say I didn't want HMOs in my ward. So we just need to be careful about how we've drafted the policy to make sure it works across the whole city. The two quick points of clarification I was looking for were around this £800 to £1,200. Is that all in? Is that your bills included? Is that your gym membership? Is that your is that factoring in if energy prices suddenly go even more through the roof than they already are, for example? And then the other thing I was looking for clarification on, when it comes to the amenities, what do the policies say about them being for the exclusive use of the residents? Or could, for example, we see developments coming forward where a gym wants to open somewhere, and the way they're going to make that viable is by sticking some co-living apartments above it, or a coffee shop chain is going to open and put some co-living apartments above it. And that's really how their business model is. It's not really about designing co-living as a concept, it's about making their business model more viable. So how would that all work?
Excellent question.
Chair, can I just come back in on that one? Because that was the point I missed off the top of my list. We went to look at some student flats, purpose-built student flats, a couple of cycles ago with Plans West, actually, at which the communal space had been reduced because they'd come to an agreement with the people next door to use their communal gym. And it seems to me that we should be saying the communal space should serve the entirety of the development, which picks up your point, I think. And you can't effectively buy out of that communal space by saying, well, we'll buy you the membership for this gym down the road.
Thank you for those questions. Catherine, can I ask you to address those?
Thank you. Yeah, I'll come back on your points of clarification, Councillor Lamb. The costs that we've put in the guidance note are taken from London, and they are all-inclusive prices, so it covers everything that someone would pay for the rent of the property, the management, the access to. They are London prices, and it was something that had been picked up that we don't have that comparative for Leeds, so it might be slightly cheaper, but not much. In terms of that exclusive use for residents, again, I think we'll need to sort of test that on a case-by-case scheme. And that example that you give in terms of sort of an independent gym or an independent coffee shop coming in with co-living above, I see very much as a mixed use scheme, as a very different model to a co-living. It's two separate uses, and I think, you know, they'd have to have separate accesses. And again, that's not something that we've come across, but something that we really need to have an awareness of. So I'll take that on board. Sorry, that's not really a clarification, but just a note.
Yeah, well, it's just it's that thing. Is it then, because if it's being brought forward described as co-living, but you're using effective what's a standalone building and saying that's the amenity for this space, well, you can't have it both ways. You're then, if it's not a co-living scheme, then, and I think it just needs to be crystal clear in the guidance when it is co-living and when it isn't co-living.
Right, can it be fairly brief, because we do need to move on at this point?
Suggests that I think we could be into viability issues here, because we've added and we've said we would like to see this included, that included. And I think a lot of these developers would come back and say, well, we can't afford to do this, we can't afford to do that. And that's where I think we need to get a position from the district valuer as to what would or wouldn't be included in any viability analysis being done by them. So I agree with what's been said, but we've added a lot to the costs of running these buildings with the suggestions we've made today.
Okay, thanks.
Could I also say, sorry, Chair, could I also say, I would not support the phrase case by case for the simple reason that what happens is we end up with developers coming and saying, well, I know they do that there, but we're next door to Starbucks, we're next door to a dark kitchen, we're next door to a gym, we don't need to do that. I think we have to be very, very clear from day one. These are the minimum standards we are expecting. We expect you to do better, but this is the minimum. And the minimum is you provide everything on site, right?
Okay, Martin, I think you've had plenty of material to go out there, so I don't know whether you want to attempt to summarise what we've covered.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Chair. No, that was really helpful. And I think it's been really useful to hear those comments, because I think we need to take this in stages, members. And there's plenty of comments that we've had today, which will help us develop a policy through Leeds Local Plan 2040, which Catherine said is going to be the formal route to establishing policy for co-living in the city. I think there's also quite a lot of what if type detail that I think members can and should bring when they're looking at scrutinising any co-living applications that come through the development management process. But I think the purpose of this guidance is firstly to fill a void in national policy and local development plan policy, and to really be clear that we want the quality and the amenity and the sustainability of the co-living model to deliver what the rest of the housing that we're seeking to deliver in Leeds does, particularly in relation to the policies that apply to public space, transport, community infrastructure, levy, affordable housing. So I think what I'm looking for is, and I think there's a number of things I think that we need to do next. I think one of those is around some testimonials around the lived experience. Another one is around a visit. And I think members are very clear that in order to help them assess planning applications as they come through, not only this guidance, but also those lived experiences are going to be very important. I think we need to then focus in on how we monitor the delivery of this in the city. Your point, Chair, around quantity, and keeping a very close eye on the numbers of approvals or otherwise that are being granted. Plus the fact, I think, if this is starting point guidance, then we need to be able to review it, and we need to be able to come back either through this panel or through joint plans panel to say, right, well, what of the incidences that have occurred through panel discussions that require us to update this guidance. But what I'm looking for really is for members to, I think, comment on, is this appropriate as a starting point that sets minimum standards for us to determine co-living, and allows you to then, at individual planning applications, to take a view on some of that detail, notwithstanding, I think, the points that we're going to take away on the scaling up point, the point around genuinely shared facilities. Are members happy for us to make those minor changes to the document and publish it?
I may say so, Martin, just before I ask that question, I think members would want reassurance that there'll be opportunities to revisit this.
I was just going to say, Chair, I mean, in terms of making the adjustments to the document, we could take it back through plans panel chairs just to give chairs reassurance that the matters that have been debated today have been reflected upon and updated in the document. And I think we are committed to keeping the document under review, given that it's a dynamic topic which will be influenced by schemes up and down the country. So we need to be able to revisit our technical guidance in parallel to the housing market assessment work being done as well.
So is panel, oops, there two people wanted to speak. Councillor Campbell. Oh, was it Councillor Lamb?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I think given the level of concerns raised here today and the significance of them, I'd really like to see the updated guidance come back here before, rather than, because there's a lot of issues, very valid issues been raised. I'm not sure I'm comfortable just a couple of tweaks here and there and away you go. I think I'd like it to come back.
Councillor Campbell.
I was going to make a similar point and ask a specific question. So 4.9 talks about 37 square meters. What's the guidelines going to say? Well, 3.9 talks about 37 square meters as the minimum space requirement, right? What's the document that we're going to produce going to say?
Unfortunately, it'll have to be the same. This is technical guidance on the current policies that we have. If we step away and try and introduce something new, that has to be done through the local plan update and new policy. So the only space standard that we refer to is in our current policies, and that refers to the nationally described space standards of 37 square meters as a minimum space. Sorry. So the 37 square meters is defined in our current policy, linked to the National Described Space Standards. If we were to step away and introduce something different, that has to come through new policy.
Can I be clear in my mind? Then 37 square meters will be the single person's living space and will not include the co-space, for want of a better word.
No, that the 37 square meters will be the size of the studio. And the shared space will be additional.
No,
Is that
sorry,
right? Is
Chair.
that wrong?
No,
No.
if the
I got that.
principle of this guidance is that the 37 square meters will be agglomerated between the studio space, the personal space, and the shared space. Because that's the model. That's the co-living model. You're not having everything behind your closed door. So your washing facilities, your kitchen.
I
big kitchen
understand. I
facilities will
understand
be
that because
outside.
we've had this argument on more than one occasion in relation to small flats. Therefore, you cannot seriously be expecting us to say to people, you will live in a space that's noticeably smaller than 37 square meters.
What it actually says in the paper on page 22 for 9 is that the minimum space requirement for a single person is 37 square meters. Co-living private studios tend to be less than this. That's what it says.
True, they do tend to be less than this because it saves you money. But is that something we accept is a reasonable standard of living for people in Leeds? And I have to say, it isn't. Sorry, I'm not going to agree to that.
Councillor Carlile.
In working out where we start now, if a co-living proposal came to City Plans panel next week, what judgment would I be making on that? So let's say something came with, I'm not going to put any numbers on it because I don't want anyone to come back and say I've allowed a flat size of a certain amount, like happens. But if something came with single private spaces at less than 37 square meters, but with communal space added on to that, what policies would I be using to make my judgment at the moment on that? So I guess my point is, if we don't agree anything around the guidance and don't publish anything anytime soon, am I leaning towards refusing that because it doesn't meet the space standards we've put out, meaning the developer will have to wait if they want to come back with something on that? Or am I leaning towards the fact that we may have to approve it because we don't have specific guidance?
We don't have detailed guidance to help you determine that planning application. This provides, linked to the policies for housing and accommodation that we've got within the current development plan, an approach to helping you assess a co-living scheme, which takes the 37 square meters that we have within the nationally described space standards and seeks to ensure that in spreading that between the behind door and shared space, there's a focus on quality and amenity, which will outweigh the fact that 37 square meters isn't all personal to every single person, and that's the model, and that's what those who are purchasing those flats or renting those flats will be buying into.
Sorry, Chair, I will be brief, but I'm always a bit pedantic on those points around that. But if an application came tomorrow for something of this kind, a panel may be minded to refuse it because the apartments were less than 37 square meters, regardless of any other space. And I would see that we may have a point in doing so at the moment without the guidance we would have. How that would go on appeal, I'll leave to others to question, but I'm not sure delaying until we've been able to have a look at any updated guidance is that much of a considerable issue in the amount of applications we may have coming forward. I think there has been a lot of concerns raised about the model, the document, and what we can put in it. And I would prefer to see it and have this debate again. I don't think we've bottomed out all the issues really, but
I think the dilemma we're in is it takes so long to change policy, because what we have to do is change the policy if we want to change the technical guidance. Now that concerns me as well, I have to say it does, but that's what we need to do.
that's the point, Chair. I think what colleagues are saying is that at the moment there is a policy vacuum. We don't have a headline uppercase policy and an adopted local plan that covers this topic. What we're trying to do at pace is to introduce technical guidance to fill that void whilst we gain a better understanding of what this product is and learn from the strategic housing market assessment, so that we are able to speak with confidence in terms of framing a future policy. The challenge I think we've got is that if it takes longer than we want it to in terms of formulating this technical guidance, applications are coming in all of the time. So we do need to try and settle this sooner rather than later.
Do we have any applications in the pipeline now?
Director Line.
Councillor Taylor and then Councillor Garthwaite.
I'm not going to comment because I agree with everything everyone says today. Just one question. Is this flat accommodating disabled with 37 meters if someone is in a wheelchair? The person could live in the flat and the circumstances change where they have to be in wheelchair. Is it accommodated for that?
Yeah, that's a good question, Councillor Taylor. And we would seek to apply our policies around accessibility. Catherine covered that in her introduction. Our policies on accessibility are around providing 30% of all dwellings to be wheelchair accessible. So we would expect the co-living to apply to that, because you might not be disabled when you actually come to apply or rent this house, but you may fall disabled for whatever reason during your occupancy. So we want to make sure that the accommodation is sufficient for that.
Adam would like to come in.
Yeah, it was just on that the point about the space standards and what do we do if we don't have any further policy on it? And this is very similar to the Liverpool case, and this is why they got guidance. But it's clear from the inspector's report that they give weight to the idea of that aggregation of space. So they recognise that Liverpool have a policy, as Leeds does, in terms of the NDSS standards. But it also says, and I can quote, that said, the co-living concept involves provision of extensive communal areas, and in this way it differs from standard apartment schemes. It is therefore reasonable to take a broader view in this case and take account of the communal areas when considering compliance with space standards. So that's one inspector's view, clearly suggesting that communal areas would be taken into account. It would certainly be a material consideration in not complying with space standards. And I think, as Catherine said, there wasn't much in that inspector's decision that suggested that the guidance made a huge amount of difference. Clearly, NDSS standards are a big factor, but they weren't the be all and end all. I think what scuppered that particular appeal was because even with aggregated space, they couldn't show that they got close enough to the 37. So we tried through this guidance to sort of fill some of that guidance, that void, by clarifying that, yes, we would like that, but also quality is a really major consideration. So I don't think necessarily, this is what the reason why the guidance is, in a sense. We don't necessarily have the luxury of saying, oh, well, we don't have a policy, so therefore we could refuse everything on this existing NDSS policy, because some statements by inspectors would suggest that other material considerations could outweigh that.
Councillor Lamb, and then I'll bring you in. Oh, was it direct comment? I'll bring you in a minute.
Absolutely, will do. I'll send that to all members of Development Plans Panel.
Yeah, it's just a quick one on the space standards. Can in the technical guidance, are we allowed to set a minimum? Obviously, it would have to be less than 37, but can we do that? And the second part to it is there any point? Because would it have any weight if we then tried to uphold it?
To be honest, Councillor Lamb, it's exactly the issue that we've grappled with ourselves, and I think our conclusion is the latter point that you come to, because all this guidance really can ever do is reiterate what existing policy is. The moment it starts to veer away from existing policy and starts to set in effect new policy, then you're looking for a different vehicle. I think that a guidance note is perhaps not your best vehicle for that. And that's where LLP 2040 comes in. So I'm happy for colleagues to disagree, but and may do. But my view is that if we did set those kind of minimums, we'd have to be really clear where the evidence was to justify what that minimum was. And I'm not clear where that evidence would come from at the moment.
Would other officers like to comment on Adam's statement? Okay. It seems I'd want to be careful that we're not going around in circles, because we're going to have to find a way of dealing with this. Councillor Campbell. It's Councillor Anderson.
Is right. There are concerns by members here today. So what is the fallback position? If we cannot agree something because we have concerns here today, what's the fallback position? What are we actually, if we don't approve it today, what are we doing to our colleagues on city plans, and what are we doing to you in terms of hamstringing you in terms of any negotiations that you may or may not be about to have with any perspective? What, because if people, and the final thing is that she'd had comment from the development lobby themselves. So they'll have been listening to this debate here today. They will, some things they will have thought, oh, that's good. Other things will have got them really, really bristling as to what this might end up being. And so are we leaving ourselves open to further challenges as a result of comments by people like me that suddenly have made suggestions that might not be helpful?
Martin.
Thanks, Chair. I think that was David's point earlier, Councillor Anderson, in that we've got two of the plans panel chairs here today, so that if we make the amendments to the document and then take that back through to plans panel chairs with the executive member to have that discussion, and we can reflect the comments that members have made today, we can write those down. I personally think some of those will be appropriate at an individual planning application discussion for you to make as you see fit. Some of those we will need to deliver through new policy. And some of those we can take on board through this document in front of us today. So I think David's suggesting that we go back through plans panel chairs and the executive member to make sure that they're comfortable with David signing off that guidance.
And I'm the world's worst at not following this. We've been now given training to be told that if something is policy compliant, we should not be negotiating in the plans panel. Whether we agree or disagree, that's the advice that's been given to us. There's a lot of grey areas in what we've discussed today, and it comes down to individual interpretation. How does that hold us in terms of the advice and guidance that we've been given by legal? You should not be redesigning it on the hoof. How will that impact on what we're agreeing or not agreeing, as the case may be?
I think you just need to hold on to the fact that this guidance is an extrapolation of the policies that we've currently got. Now, there will be some new issues that these planning applications raise that it will be right to consider through the planning application process. And I think they're going to have to be raised because this is new. I think we're going to have to receive advice at individual planning committees and through individual decision taking as to the extent to which the council in its decision can go. And that will cover things like key workers, concierges, management, etc. There'll be a limit, I think, to the extent that the grant of planning permission will be able to cover all of these issues. But I think we're going to have to feel our way on that.
So we are stuck with the policy we have. We can change it, but it will take time to change. I do agree that taking this back through plans chairs is a good idea with the executive member, and we can perhaps even have an extended or a special meeting for this issue, because I think we do need
with respect
to continue.
I do think that the rest of us ought to see it. All right, sorry.
I accept that there are a lot of things that members are unhappy with and would want to see again in some form. So I think I want to discuss that with plans chairs as to how we get that information to you. I understand there is unrest, particularly about space standards and many other things too. So I would feel uneasy myself about concluding this meeting by saying plans chairs will look at it and then it will go ahead. I think there's some way we need to check back in with the broader panel. Do people agree? I know officers will be feeling very anxious about this. So it might well be that we have to either have an additional meeting or we have to do something by email or we have to do something quickly, because I appreciate that you do need a solution. But it is clear that colleagues are unhappy about certain parts. And I want to talk to my fellow chairs really about how we think that problem can be resolved. Al, were you indicating? You are indicating, I just can't see Anne.
Yes, I think what you outline is very sensible and good. And I just repeat that I think a visit to somewhere and hearing from people, because I go round and round in my head, because I can think of some people for whom what's proposed here would actually be fine, that they're in Leeds for maybe 2-3 months, for 2-3 nights a week. They've got their own home elsewhere. They just want a place where they can leave their stuff. They don't want to be all alone, so they can mingle if they wish. It could be fine. For someone else who's there permanently, no, for a length of time, it would be too small. It wouldn't fit. But then they might only be there temporarily. So it's a really difficult one in that way for me to decide on.
I mean, to some degree, we don't have choices at this stage, and that's what officers have been saying to us. But I still feel I want to have an honest debate at chairs level. Who was first? Councillor Lamb.
Yeah, I'm so with the greatest respect to you, Chair, I don't think what you're proposing is acceptable. The great strength of this group is its cross-party, and every single person without exception comes here and works together as one team. And taking it just to chairs is taking that away from everybody else. And it's not like there's a couple of little bits that we're splitting hairs about. There's deep principle points here that we're not happy about. And I think it's essential that it comes back to this body. And the other point, there aren't going to be visits and things before the decision's taken and the guidance is written. From what you've described, that isn't going to happen because there isn't time, and everybody's agreed it needs to happen. From what you've said, that's not going to happen. We're just going to take the comments from today, issue some guidance. My question to Martin would be, is there a workaround here to actually, because what we need is new policy. Actually, the guidance will help, but we need policy. Is there a workaround to say this is a special case? The rest of the local plan updates is reviewing existing policy. For this, we need new policy. Is there a workaround that means we can get on with getting new policy faster outside of local plan update 2?
Just to clarify, I wasn't suggesting taking it to plans chairs only. I was suggesting that as an additional stage.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Would you like to just kind of think where we are for a moment?
Yeah. Just before he does, can I put? Sorry, I will go on forever about space standards.
Please go.
Well, it took a long time to get the ones we've got, but there are a lot of people who are living in much better conditions now because I argued. Two things. We do actually have some standards, don't we? In that we have a policy which relates to student accommodation, which actually does give us some indication about the size of units compared with the size of communal space. Now, it would seem to me if we're producing an interim policy, we have a policy base on which to argue at an appeal. Because at the moment, what we're saying is actually the flat can be so small that you could only just get a bed in it, provided the rest of it's a big space. And that's what none of us want. And none of us want people to live in small units. So it seems to me that we do have in an interim, and I'm trying to be helpful here, as an interim policy, we do have something which is our current student co-living policies. And so I would think it's quite reasonable for us to, we could argue that with an inspector. Because I think we are trying to be reasonable, and that's what it is. I also think that if, and you'll tell me I'm wrong, but I'm going to suggest it anyway. If we come up with an interim policy and we take it to full council and full council agree it as an interim policy with a fixed date to when we'll get a new one, then it seems to me that will be quite a reasonable argument to take to an inspector. And I think we need something before 2040, quite frankly.
Martin. I agree.
Just clarify for those tuning in that 2040 isn't the anticipated date of adoption of the plan, it's when the plan will run to. Can I just say, Councillor Campbell, I don't think it's appropriate to use the HMO policy and the student policy for this, because this isn't student housing. I think what I'd like to suggest is that we publish this as draft technical guidance, which would enable officers to use it now, which would at least take us further than we currently are in terms of not having any policy to apply to it. We then have the discussion with plans panel chairs, including the long list of points that was made today. We commit to bring that back to a future meeting of development plan panel, where we turn that draft interim technical guidance into interim technical guidance. And in that way, we fill the void quickly to help determine any planning applications that come between now and when the next development plan panel meeting is, which is likely to be May. And I think, don't forget, Councillor Campbell, that the Leeds Local Plan 2040 can gain weight as it progresses through the process. So I think if we have a draft policy, which we work on, which we evidence, because evidence is going to be key to this as well. And I think even if we took an interim policy to full council, we need to have evidence to support that policy if it was significantly different to what we're trying to achieve now. That policy can have weight as we go through. So we're not having to wait for adoption of Leeds Local Plan 2040. We can start to work on that policy and hopefully start to apply that policy sooner.
I think that sounds like a sensible plan. I mean, we're compromised, but we have no choice. We have to find a way through it. And whilst ever it's draft, there is the possibility there of changing it into the future. Does the panel accept that proposal? Well, we could put it to the vote, I guess, could we? Could we put that proposal to the vote? Do I have a proposer? Do I have a proposer? Thank you. Do I have a seconder? Okay, all of those in favour, please. 1, 2, 3, 4. Those against? 3. So it has just been approved. But I promise you, we'll do our very best to bring it back and make things different. If you've got a better suggestion.
The thing that the major concern is what Martin's just said, which is, in effect, you're going to knock up the draft guidelines, which effectively will be what we've got in front of us today, none of which we agree. I don't think anybody who's sitting here has said, yeah, that's fine. Every single one of us has said there's something wrong with parts of that. And I think we, if nothing else, let's park the space. If nothing else, you need to pick up the other points that everybody else has made and put those into that document, which is before it gets issued to anybody as a draft.
Yep, I totally support that. But Nicole, I think, wants to offer us some advice.
Thank you, Chair. Just for clarity, this guidance note is to really set out the local planning authority's position based on its existing plans policy, because that's all we've got to rely on. But it's really a publication of our position that just because you come in with a co-living scheme doesn't mean that you can automatically assume that we're not going to ask for affordable housing, we're not going to ask for certain space standards, we're not going to ask for green space. And so that document sets out how we believe all of those existing plans policies will be applied to any application, because it's a new kind of model doesn't mean that none of those other policies apply. So the protection that members are asking for actually is the starting position. What we do have to acknowledge is that in relation to the layout, a little bit like purpose-built student accommodation, when they first started coming into the city, I remember members were quite anxious about the space standards. So the space standard will be the starting point, but it is a material consideration that members will need to grapple with at an application stage as to how that communal space contributes to offsetting any shortfall that may or may not be presented as a unit. So the guidance is really just pulling it all together so that applicants realise they can't just put in this, this unique scheme that then doesn't apply, that no other policies apply for. So I think some of the anxieties that members have quite rightly acknowledged, I think maybe they don't need to be so anxious about, because our local plan policies are there and they're adopted. I think some of the other things, say, for example, with regard to key workers, they are things that we will look to when we bring in a new policy that is specific to co-living, but it's not something we can ask for now, because you can't bring in interim policy through, for example, a resolution of full council. An interim policy is a policy that's brought in through a development plan policy, which is the next plan that Martin and colleagues have been talking about. So I think I can see why there is anxiety, but we shouldn't forget how much weight our local plan policies actually carry. And this is really that publication to potential applicants that policy still applies, albeit in some circumstances for some policies, there may be additional material considerations that we do have to consider. It doesn't mean that members will consider that they outweigh the plan policies, but there are things that they need to have regard to. So I don't know if that helps with some of the concerns, because the guidance is not adding anything more to what we've already got. It's just that publication of our position statement, really.
Thank you, Nicole. Very clear advice, and I think you'll be called on frequently within the plans panels to give advice at the point of decision making. Thank you. Okay, anything more, Martin? All right, okay, well, we'll finish this public meeting. I suggest we have a 5-minute comfort break, even though the time's got on, and then we'll come back for the workshop, please. Thank you, members.